All right, so hopefully you have on your notes right now your boxes that produce the products that you have here written that you have here along that I have with me in blue. Go ahead and take a second to check your work. Hopefully you can see the blue writing okay. Just like when I introduced the special cases a few weeks ago, there was a pattern. And that pattern helps you use the shortcut. If you don't see the pattern, you can't use the shortcut. You just box, which is fine. But hopefully the patterns that you see will be the same patterns that I asked you to look for a few weeks ago. For the first three problems, hopefully you realize that the first term and the last term, these are perfect squares. All right, so hopefully this is what you see, and you can write this down somewhere on one of your answers. Now, if you're asking me how is this a perfect square, the h squared and the y squared, you've got to remember that 1 is a perfect square. All right, so you start with the perfect square and you end with the perfect square. Hopefully you see that pattern. All right, then your middle term, see the middle term here? It's always going to be double your second value. Your middle term, so if this is a positive 2, I get a positive 4. If this is a negative 5, you're doubling it, it's a negative 10. This is a positive 2, then that's a positive 4, and you've got that S there to add to it. So that's the pattern for these first three. You start and end with the perfect square, and you double to get the number in the middle. Again, if you don't see that pattern, just box it. But if you do see the pattern, you could go straight from here to here, all right, with no problems, okay? Now, let's look at the last three. If you can see the answers pretty well, it's the same thing, except there's no middle term. Your first term and your last term, oh, I made a mistake here. That should be a 9. Sorry. Hopefully you didn't make that mistake too. But your first term and your middle term should be perfect squares. I'm sorry, your first term and your last term should be perfect squares. Now, if you don't know what your perfect squares are, you're going to have a little bit of a problem with this section because all of this is based on knowing your perfect squares. Okay? So what I advise to you is if you need to, take a minute on the side of your notes, and I even have it written here. See? This is where I would put, well, no, that's where am I? Right here. I would take a little box on the side of your paper, your notes, and I would just write them out. If you don't know them by heart, which you may not, some of y'all don't even know your multiplication table, so I don't expect you to be able to know your perfect squares. But I would take a corner on your notes, and I would go all the way down to 12 squared. Write it down. Matter of fact, everybody needs to do that. I don't even want to say, oh, you know what, you don't. Everybody, I need to see this here on the side of your paper. Take a moment and write out the first 12 perfect squares. And then you'll be able to recognize these numbers that I've underlined here. All right? So do that before you start the next video. Now, at the bottom of your notes, I tell you that your answers, your trinomials, represent two special cases. I didn't give you names for them earlier, but I'm going to give you names for them today, all right? The first set that we did here, the first three, those special cases are called perfect square trinomials. That's what they're called. Numbers 1, 2, and 3 are called perfect square trinomials. Perfect square, meaning they start and end with the perfect square trinomial because there's 3 terms, okay? The second special case is what you had over here for number 4, 5, and 6. Those are called difference of 2 squares, all right? Difference means you're subtracting, and if you notice, that's what we did over there. Every single one of them has a subtraction. 2 means there's only 2 terms, because you only have 2 terms. You're missing that middle terms. And squares is actually squares, perfect squares. So they're talking, when they say squares, they really mean perfect squares, difference of 2 squares. We call the perfect square trinomials PSTs, and we call difference of 2 squares dots. All right, so before you start the next video, get your perfect squares written on the side, and then we'll move on and talk a little